That was the idea. How do we unite people through competition? How do we teach people that competition is important? And how do we teach people that you should show up and fail to take first place, but continue to show up?
Welcome to our latest episode. Today we are joined by Steve Forti. Prior to founding FitFight, a global fitness competition app, Steve was a consultant for Johnson & Johnson's orthopedic trauma division, where he utilized 8 years of critical care and trauma nursing experience. In the military, he earned the rank of Master Sergeant after serving over 23 years in Army Special Forces. He is a level 1 sniper and attended Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, as well as a Special Operations Planners course in Norfolk, Virginia. Steve earned a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing from Quinnipiac University, completed a critical care residency at Yale New Haven Hospital Systems, and holds a Bachelor's of Science from Southern Connecticut State University. In March of 2020, Steve was asked to join the amazing team at the Hospital for Special Surgery as the Chief of Staff for Crisis Management, the #1 orthopedic surgical hospital in the world, as they transformed the entire hospital into a COVID treatment center to do their part in the fight to save lives during the height of the COVID crisis. As the crisis ebbed, he was asked to join the leadership team there as a Chief Wellness and Resiliency Officer. Real stories, real heroes, for a real cause. This is Never Left Behind, the podcast. Steve, how are you tonight? Dan and I are so happy to have you on the show. It's great to kind of kick things off, especially this early into season 2, and just to be able to catch up with you. How's your night going?
Oh, fantastic. And I'm really grateful that you asked and grateful to be having this conversation we're going to have tonight.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, we're excited that you even honored your presence in the book, and we're excited. You know, you got to share a little bit of your story in the book, and man, it was awesome when we first met you, and you just got straight into it and pulled really on the heart of what we were trying to do with this book. Because for me, I think you were the second person that I physically was with doing the interview process. Mm-hmm. So it was incredibly powerful for me. And so I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. You know, if you turn the pages of the book, there's actual giants in that book, so I'm incredibly humbled to be on the same pages with them. You know, there's men and women that have had such experiences after 2 decades at war, and so many people have contributed such a substantial piece of the fight, more so than I have. So I'm just humbled to be a part of it. So thank you for even asking.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And, everybody plays a piece for sure, but serving 23 years is pretty substantial. And I know it was on again, off again, serving in the National Guard. But if you can kind of take us back to the beginning of, what inspired you to join the military in the first place, because I know you joined in a pre 9/11 military.
Very pre. It was an interesting time. There was a few different things. I would say that the biggest thing that pushed me in the direction was, my initial introduction into the military through ROTC. I was a freshman at Northeastern University, and I had gotten a taste of what the military was like. And I was an athlete my entire life. So the physicality of it came pretty easy for me, and I knew I wanted to do more. So I enlisted into the Army Reserves at the time as a way to round off my career and my experience on the road to becoming commissioned as an officer. And what would follow is what, just really pushed me in the direction of going special forces. And what had happened is my father passed away during my freshman year of college at Northeastern. He was a veteran himself. He was a Marine Corps veteran in Vietnam, and he was severely injured, after 13 months in combat, and he actually died from cancer from Agent Orange.
Jeez.
And I had one of those first real life moments. We always have a few of them, right? But the one that sort of everything turns on or hinges on, where there's no do-over. And I remember being at the financial aid office at Northeastern, and recognizing the fact that I had no way to pay for college and they expected to be paid for college.
Yeah.
And there was just no means, there was nothing that was going to change the fact that there was a need that I didn't have the ability to fulfill. And it was at that time that I, basically withdrew from college, whatever, and tried to figure out a way to make a buck and figure out what my next plan was. And quite frankly, I was having a hell of a time in Boston, not being an adult. I was working at a bar in the Marriott Long Wharf, and having a little bit too healthy of a social life. And a year had gone by, and I'd gotten nothing done. I mean, nothing done. And that prompted me to take a look at the 19th Special Forces Group.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I needed a different path. I knew I wasn't going to get an opportunity to do anything. I was barred from going active duty at the time. At that point in time, you couldn't transfer from National Guard into active duty. Quite frankly, everything was downsizing during it was during the Clinton years, and everything was actually downsizing. There were people graduating from college, commissioned officers, and they were getting these deals like, hey, you don't need to pay back college and you don't need to serve. Sign here, take care. So it was a very different place than it is right now, where my inclination would have been to enlist, and probably my thought was to go to Ranger Battalion at the time, but there was no road there. So the most I could do was Special Forces. So I went and found a home at the 19th Special Forces Group in Rhode Island, and that is what began this this journey for me. It's such a significant journey for me.
Yeah.
Were you always just interested then in being in Special Forces?
No. I grew up in a household that was, the trajectory of my parents' marriage and all of our lives were altered significantly from a few things. My father suffered from post-traumatic stress. And he was a severely disabled veteran. He had been, he was blown up in a Jeep. They called it a booby trap on the Western Union, I believe. But, it was an IED. It's what we know as an IED.
Geez.
So he was IED'd in Da Nang. He had his, buttstock of his weapon basically blown through his right lower extremity. His skull was fractured in 5 places. He had 70% body surface area burns. He spent as much time at St. Albans Hospital recovering as he did in combat. In Vietnam. So my family was not, they were incredibly pro-patriotic, but really, really not looking for one of their children to go serve. And it was a very different lens. It was a different optic.
I can imagine back then too, especially what he went through, of why they want any of their children to serve.
Totally understandable. And the interesting thing about it, and I may even get a little bit emotional here, but my big joke is, but I'm a 225-pound problem. If someone has issue with me crying, we can figure it out, right? But not referencing you guys, but just something I always say, like it is when I went to my father and said, like, hey, I was planning this path, and he looked at me just so calmly, and he's like, it's up for every young man and woman to decide the capacity in which they will serve their country.
Wow.
End of story. Full support. Wow. So if he can offer that level of support, it was extraordinary. It was a gift. I don't know what else to compare it to. It was a gift that this man, who had every reason to say, like, man, I love you. I did the part for both of us, could have easily have been the narrative. I did it for both of us, and you're all set. Go live. Or I served so you don't have to, so what are you doing? That could have been it. It wasn't it at all. And then surprisingly, the pride that many of my other family members had, even as concerned and worried as they were, the pride that they had for having another generation of people serving was really significant. And it was great.
Did you have, not to go, and not to even go too far off track, but you said you weren't really doing much with your life back then. Were there other kind of interests you had besides the military that you saw yourself doing? Maybe it was like 5 to 10 years down the line.
Yeah. I can tell a funny story, but I want to see, I don't know how it'll play.
No pressure.
So I didn't have a thing I was good at, right? So I was I was always fast and strong, whether I was training or not.
Mm-hmm.
And my academic career was light. I don't think I considered myself particularly intelligent. When, when we all go through MEPS, right, and we take the ASVAB and all those tests. I remember the recruiter, drill sergeant, whatever it was at the time, I don't know. And he's like, "Come here, genius." And I thought he was, busting my balls because I scored really poorly. I was like, the word's out. I'm an idiot officially. But I was actually, because I scored, very well. And I didn't have that thing that identified me. And I was surrounded by people, at that age, at 20, I think it was 20, where a lot of people understood what they wanted. They might have wanted to go to school and become lawyers or architects or doctors, or other people were getting commissioned to go into the military. Some people wanted to be professional pilots or state policemen. Like, that was my circle. I hung out with a bunch of musicians from Berkeley and Boston, and they knew their path, or they thought they did. But I was a bit lost, very sincerely, I liked partying. And that was the beginning and the end of my skill set at the time. But I did know I didn't want to make nothing of myself. I always aspired to be somebody to be taken seriously. And this seemed like a good path to begin that journey. One of the things that had happened in that story, and I'll give you the abridged version, but there was a hometown, idol hero of mine when I was in high school, a very young kid in high school, like a freshman. And this kid was a much upperclassman. I think he was a senior at the time. Football player of the works, prom king, etc. And I ran into him in Boston, and it had really turned out that he peaked in high school. And I remember it was like, oh my God, if that's where he started and ended up, where am I going to end up? And it was that quick, where turned on a dime, and I said, this is my new path, and this is what I'm putting 100% of my effort into, and I'm going to make this happen. So thankfully 19th Special Forces Group gave me the opportunity to try out and go to selection. And once I got through that gateway, it was just a matter of knocking down the other gates and getting through the training.
That's crazy.
So I know you joined pre 9/11, and I would imagine you were in for several years, especially if you're in during the Clinton administration. So you're in for several years before 9/11 happened. But growing up, especially in the Northeast, and then seeing what happened when the Twin Towers came down, like, how did that affect you and your mentality, especially serving in 19th Group?
Yeah. So it's a complex question for a lot of reasons, because of what was happening in my life at the time. A few weeks before that, we buried my mother to an acute alcohol event. She overconsumed at a wedding, fell, struck her head, aspirated, and I took her off life support 3 days later.
Wow. Jeez.
Okay. 9/11 was my first day back to work.
Wow.
And I was actually in the air when it went down. And sorry, I got a puppy here making some noise. And 9/11, so it was my first day back. I got grounded in Midway in Chicago. I was on my way out to LA. There were no rental cars to be found. You couldn't get, nothing came back to the airport. No one could go anywhere. There was no public transport. There was nothing happening. The entire blanket of the airport was shut down. And the only way I could actually get out of the area at Midway Airport in Chicago was I rented a car service to pick me up and drive me back to Connecticut.
Wow.
And I'll never forget the optic of driving through the areas. And truthfully, I'd be making it up if I knew. I believe it was, the corridor, the West Virginia corridor that you go through when you go from the Midwest. And as we were cutting through, and we were going through the mountains and regions, and we began passing heavy equipment, excavators, cranes, front loaders, dump trucks. And it went on, it had to be for 90 minutes. A single convoy of people coming from all over the world all over the country to assist. Right.
That's crazy.
And I was so compelled. I wanted to get on a plane yesterday. I was angry. Drove through New York City as the sun was coming up and saw it. We drove through over the Tappan Zee Bridge. If you know the area, this is a bridge up a little bit further up on the Hudson River, but on a clear day, and it was a clear day, you could see straight down, and you could see the smoke and everything billowing up, and you still saw construction equipment and everything. And I was grateful to be in proximity to being able to do something about it, you know. Now that wouldn't come for many years, but I was still grateful to be in proximity to do something, or at least to train to do something. I knew that there was a possibility of doing something, and all of us, I think, to a man, and I say a man because in special operations up until recently it was an all-male gig. We were chomping at the bit. Many of us were looking at other units to try to go to that we knew were getting deployed. National Guard units were deployed almost immediately. National Guard Special Forces groups were deployed very, very early on in the war. So we were looking to strap hang, and you know, there were certain things they were looking for, and most of us weren't what they were looking for. You know, they're looking for medics and commo guys primarily. And then, you know, we start reassessing whether or not me going to the weapons course was the best plan for Steve's career.
How early on was that? Was that like October?
Oh yeah,
they started deploying. Okay,
yeah, absolutely. October, November timeframe.
Yep.
You know, so we really did try to do what we could to get involved, and some Guard guys did get deployed really early on, but we would end up getting sent to Kuwait to continue the missions that were currently going on and deployed in those areas. And we were, you know, best able, very frankly, and it was the right decision. We were able to, you know, get our readiness up. You know, doing foreign internal defense missions in places like Kuwait, and the active duty guys that were slotted to go there were put in theater, and that continued for a bit. But then, obviously, as you know, everybody got their turn to go to either one of the two conflicts that would kick off soon after.
Yeah, you know, we talk about it as such a powerful image. You were talking about driving through West Virginia and seeing all the trucks and everything going into New York. Is, you know, we talked about it a few times. J-Rod, who I think when we were up in New York, we visited J-Rod as well. And
he was in contact through JC, just like you were.
Yeah. And he told a very powerful story too, just how that whole area, and we talked about it on that podcast, is it's amazing to see how such a tragedy can instantly bind people together. Like how quickly overnight there could have been any sort of disagreement or, you know, haste or anger towards your neighbor, but the second something like that happened, everybody was wanting to help each other.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that shocked me with COVID.
Yeah,
because we had a unifying enemy in COVID.
Yeah.
But yet the way it netted it out, the shelf life on that piece, and we'll go into that later in the interview, but that galvanizing factor had a short half-life.
Yeah. Which I know there's a lot of factors, and I want to get into all of that, especially when we talk about your experience through all of that and helping out in the hospital. So I want to dive in a little bit deeper to that. But to go back kind of into those early years of your military career, and talking about those first deployments and things, and when you finally did get to see, you know, some action and actually spend some time overseas, is that something that kept you motivated, kept you staying in? Because 23 years is a long time to commit to something and wanting to continue to serve.
Yeah. And I wonder, you know, I've never sort of done a deep dive with myself with those choices. Sometimes, you know, it's good to leave those things where they are. Oh, yeah. It was interesting. You know, I got to deploy a couple times, multiple times in the 90s. I mean, multiple times. You know, I did Egypt a couple times, which was great, foreign internal defense missions and training missions, and got to really do the special forces training mission. If we think back, it's actually pretty funny, but we were doing new equipment training for the first rollouts of GPS. And it was literally like, I mean, it might as well have been like a box with a directional arrow on it, you know. And it, you know, I think it got you, you know, plus or minus 30
Don't
miles
age yourself too much.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. I think it got you plus or minus 30 miles within your target.
Wow.
But no, it was good, but you did have to know how to use it. And there was, some instruction that we did. So, we got to train the Egyptian Rangers on these things, and we worked with soldiers from the UAE, and it was interesting. And it was, getting that cross-cultural piece down, which would pay dividends later, identifying the commonalities between our fellow man and fellow warriors that would pay dividends down the road. So I got to do a lot of that in advance of 9/11, right? And then deployed in support of of OEF to Kuwait, and then we got to this place, and you guys are probably too young to fully understand, but there was this fear of this bog dwell time, like how much time are people spending overseas versus at their home dwelling, and the way that the calculation worked out, we weren't getting sent anywhere in sort of direct support. We weren't going to see any quote unquote action, that we wanted to see, or truly test ourselves the way we wanted to be tested. And it was a sore spot. And that's why I said it was a long road to get there. It was a sore spot for us, because when you talk about, being up here in the Northeast, there was a part of me that was furious and even enraged to think, like, you're from Ohio, you think it landed the same way for you. Now, this was wrong on my part, but it was where I was. You're from Idaho, you think it hit you the same way it hit me. We had guys in my unit. We had a guy in my unit in particular who would later go on to deploy to Iraq, who was literally just started with, he was a police officer in New York City, just went to FDNY, finished the academy. I think it was within a few days. And I don't want to mistell the story, but my recollection is it was in a few days that 9/11 happened.
Jeez.
Okay. And his crew got hurt on 9/11, and a lot of guys, and the death toll was horrific, and the funerals he had to attend and everything he went through. So there was a part of us that knew him and saw the pain that he was in, that wanted revenge for that. I'm just being candid. Like, I know revenge isn't a good thing, and it's not supposed to be personal, but this was personal. And a lot of us were like, you from Florida and you think you know what it was like? I mean, where I lived at the time in Milford, Connecticut, I could see the smoke. I mean, like, it was terrible, and we were furious about it. So it did land. In my mind, it landed differently. So when we knew we weren't going anywhere come 2003, I got to that point where it's like, all right, how are you going to make a substantial impact in the world? And you do like people, and you like medicine. So, go to med school, do what you need to do. So I began taking the prerequisite for med school. And in the application process, you needed, and I can't remember the numbers, but I think you needed 900 patient contact hours in order to apply for medical school. And I was like, so wait a minute, I could become a paramedic or an EMT, get 900 hours over the course of 2.5 to 3 years, and then apply. Or I could do a Bachelor of Science in Nursing and get the critical care and the experience that I wanted to get. And then if I applied to medical school and it took a while, I could still work as a nurse and have that experience, which will make me a better physician. And that was my thought process. So I went to nursing school. I finished that. I did a critical care residency, and fell in love working in emergency departments. I mean, absolutely fell in love with it. Doing critical care, getting a point to serve your community again, having proximity to saving lives, being a part of a team. Those were all important things that I knew I wanted to do. I've always felt compelled to some degree for service. So that's what I ended up doing. And I ended up working in an emergency room for almost the better part of 8 years. And and what had happened was a friend of mine who, just a fantastic guy, Mark Simon, if you take the other end of the spectrum of professional soldier from where I am, there's Mark. I mean, he's CW4 now. He's started in the old guard, just took care of people, took care of the men, just bettered himself constantly. And he got commissioned and was taking a team to Afghanistan, and called me up and said, like, hey, I'm going to be heading overseas. And he even made some comment. He's like, you said if I was ever taking a team downrange. So I ended up, So I ended up re-enlisting because I was not going to watch my friends, people I cared about and loved, go downrange without being with them, So I re-enlisted and began I mean, everything from getting back in shape, getting back in, shooting shape, getting my mind right. I went through a bunch of different trainings leading up to it, that, would be put to good use down range. I still deployed as a weapons guy, to Afghanistan, a junior weapons guy actually, but I was a critical care nurse. So it's kind of like another secret medic on the team, another 18 Delta.
Yep.
And got to go down range with them, trained for about a year, going to different schools and stuff, and then got to go down range.
Wow. That's crazy.
I always, two things that you said that I want to make sure I cover. But first is, it's crazy to me, the National Guard, Army Reserves, everything like that is, they talk about being a citizen soldier or whatever, and like spending your time legitimately 90% of your time is like you're a civilian. You're just a normal person going to work, doing your job. But there's always something in the back of your mind that you're going to go to drill, or you have some trainings come up that will remind you. But especially when you're in heavy deployment mode, or your readiness is kicking into high gear. I just couldn't imagine that switching back and forth between your normal day job, but then also knowing in the back of your mind, I'm getting ready to deploy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what was that like, kind of that switching back and forth for you?
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for saying that. That's the first time I've ever heard anybody actually address that piece of it. Right. And quite to the contrary, when people hear National Guard, they immediately think like, oh, he's not he or she is not in the real army. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which historically, if you look back to World War II, I mean, if you look over the contributions that are made over the years, if you look at the fight that's going on, the National Guard has more than done their fair share. And whether that's combat arms or medical support or any of it, it's not sustainable to do what's been done over the past 20 years without the reserves and the National Guard. And especially when you get into like the logistics space, it just absolute impossibility. So I've always taken great pride in it. I've always taken pride too in the fact that what makes National Guard Special Operations unique is the different skills that get brought to bear. So everybody has their MOS, their job. For those listening that don't, you have your specialties, right? But then in addition to that, there's whatever you do on the civilian side. So, often, and everybody thinks everybody in the National Guard's a cop, and it's true. There's a lot of guys that are, police officers there, and that comes in incredible. It comes in it's such a great skill to have for a lot of the deployments that we do. Like when you're training a public protection force, like we did in Afghanistan, and these things, it's a skill set that's amazing. And you can't, these guys walk the beat, quote unquote, or patrol or do their job. We had a detective with us. You have these guys that do this job and they're so good at it and they do it 24/7. It's second nature to them. And then they deploy and they get to train in it. And that's something that you can't have. So there's actually a better translation for the current, insurrective environment that we're in. Okay. And I'm not talking about like the tier 1 kinetic guys. That's got to be a full-time gig. It's just it is, and that's okay. And I never wanted to. I would never want to take away from the extraordinary job that Ranger Battalion does, and the other tier 1 units, the special mission units. It's a different set of skill that's brought when you're speaking in a purely kinetic environment. But when you start getting into that grayer area, when you start talking about intelligence gathering and collecting, when you start talking about civil disturbance, when you start talking about counter narcotics or human trafficking or all these different things that come into the modern day battlefield, arguably a National Guard Special Operations unit could potentially be, in the right setting, I'm not taking away from the active duty, but in the right setting could be more effective depending on the mission set that they're tasked with. Because if you had a National Guard team who's got 3 or 4 police officers on it that run patrols and knows what it's like to handle people and knows how to teach law, or instructors at the State Police Academy, which we had, that asset is irreplaceable. And, one of the soft truths is, you can't produce this after the fact. Well, these guys are already ready to go in this space, and they do an amazing job when called to train other people in these different areas. I was a critical care nurse, but I knew chest tubes. All right, I knew drug titration. I also knew community medicine. When you work in a busy, emergency department like Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is where I worked, and some other emergency rooms, you learn the community health aspect of things. You learn all the medications that people are on, and it's an asset that's tough to replicate.
Yeah, absolutely.
That sounds
I didn't
interesting
answer your
too, like
question.
just memorizing all
Yes,
that.
it's hard to straddle both lives. I apologize. I didn't even come close to answering your question. It is difficult to straddle both lives, and where it gets really difficult is on the coming back.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because like, let's say, you're on active duty Army, right? And you get your 30 days block leave or whatever the case may be. And you go back. Well, you come back with the National Guard and you get that same amount of time. And then one day you wake up, and even though you've been away from your family for this extended duration, now you're going back to being a nurse. Now you're going back to being a police officer. You're going back to working second or third shift. Okay. And then what has happened over the past 2 decades is about 6 months passes, and then you find out the next date that you're going to deploy, or
Mhm.
scheduled to tentatively deploy, or you find out that you're not deploying, but you got a 6-week deployment that's going to be just inconvenient enough to screw up your relationship with your employer.
Yep.
Man.
Right. Make no mistake about it. The support you get by any civilian employer it has a shelf life to it, and understandably so. And when the smaller the company it is, and the more inconvenient or more of a hardship or more of a cost it is to them, the less of a shelf life it has. So when you live these dual lives, and there are people that have varying degrees of support for that, and all of it's understandable. You should say like, hey, 100%, but quite frankly, nobody helps out these smaller employers or the employers at all. It's not like they get a federal tax break or something like that assists them in this. So it's weird to juggle both worlds, without a doubt.
Yeah. It is, I could only imagine experiencing it, but for the first time ever, I had to experience something like that. So we have a coworker at my full-time job, and he was supposed to go to drill for 4 weeks, but he was in the middle of a project, and a customer he was working with said, no, he can't leave. If he leaves, it's going to stop our progress and we're going to lose a bunch of money and stuff like that. We're like, well, he has orders to go. Don't know what you can do. And the customer called and got a hold of the National Guard and personally wrote a letter and like requested that he get an exception or whatever it's called, to not have to go, and like went around the back way to do it, and then like handed the letter back to him. It was like, all right, you don't have to go anymore. I was like, what?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
And it's so frustrating to me, because to me, I don't think that employer realizes the impact of him not now like going on that training, because say something in the world did happen and that unit now has to deploy. He missed out on all of the training that could have been critical to his position in that unit to make their readiness 100%.
Yeah.
And it's a balance, right? And I will say this other piece of it too, is I think on the other side, the National Guard could also go a long way to making it easier for employers, or be more rewarding for employers to at least get educated on the process. And they do try, right? They try to have these events and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's really hard. Like, you've served. It's hard to articulate what it's like. Like, first of all, everybody thinks if you go to Afghanistan, you step off the plane firing gunshots, and you do that for a 6 to 12 month deployment. And as you're getting on the plane, you're shooting the door, and then you close the door, and then you fly away. It's hard to articulate the reality of the environment, right?
Yep.
So
you're saying it's not like Call of Duty,
light of it, but it's a reality.
It's not like video games then.
Yeah. It just isn't, right? Like, and I think everybody's haloing in, right?
Yeah.
And, there is a understanding mismatch. There's a understanding of the criticality of the need for the National Guard. And there's a continuum, right? There's people who are like, nope, we got your back 100%. And that's amazing, right? And then you have this group over here that's like, well, what am I supposed to do when you're running around in the woods for 2 weeks? And a lot of guys pay a price for that. I keep saying guys. A lot of guys and girls, and guys and gals and women in the armed forces, have paid a price for that attitude and that lack of understanding and the lack of education. It's an interesting battle that I think will have to be fought constantly.
Are you still currently in the process of retiring?
I am. I'm actually going through a med board right now.
Okay.
which has been an interesting journey in itself. I got a few miles on the chassis at this point. I got, several herniated discs. I had a really bad reaction to the smallpox vaccine. So all of these things are documented. So as on my way out, these things need to be properly adjudicated for my benefit. So they've gotten pretty good at it. They've gotten certainly better at these things, but right now I'm going through the process, and it's like, we talk about the understanding the system. We have a person in California who schedules my appointments, and they're like, oh, well, that's good. That's only, 26 miles from his house to this center here in New Jersey. Oh yeah, we'll just make it for 8:00 on a Tuesday morning, when it might as well be a helicopter ride. Like when you have to drive, you've driven through New York City, right? Like, it's at rush hour. It's a 4.5 hour commute at that point. So I've been spending a lot of time driving all over the tri-state area, going to appointments at different hours that I have no control over.
Jeez. Well, I remember you were telling us that in person, and obviously I'm interested in hearing more about where your life is taking you now, but I know that you mentioned before that you were still in the process of retiring.
Yeah, it's an ongoing thing, and it'll probably be another 6 months, ideally. Like, I mean,
really,
I'd be happy. Yeah, just nothing goes as quick as you want it.
Yeah. So I kind of have a deeper question for you, because I know you're in this process of separating, and you've spent so much of your life in service to the military in different regards. Like, have you started reflecting back on it and thinking about the last 20 years and kind of 23 years and what that's meant to you, and the things that you've thought of and are carrying forward after you retire?
Yeah. That's a big question. And I'm glad you asked it. So the saying that I had, and the things that got me back on the plane in 2008, and the sentiment that I've always had, is that everything that's decent and good about me is as a result of the relationships and the friendships that I forged in the special operations community. Everything that's terrible about me is in spite of most of those same men's best efforts. Right. I feel my age, right? I'm 50, and I'll be 50 in November. I haven't lived a stress-free life, and multiple knee surgeries, back injury, whatever. I'm not as mobile or as dangerous as I once was, and I think every man at my age probably starts feeling that, some more than others, So I reflect on that piece of it, and my goal is to find ways in which to continue to serve. I mean, the value I've gotten out of my life and my existence is through some service. I mean, what you're doing is service. Your book is service. So I'm shifting my focus, because my physical capability is not what it once was. If I was a younger man, I would do it all over again, or even if I had a younger frame, I would. Maybe if I went through the ringer one more time, I'd actually turn out the way I loved. But I'm board president of a drug and alcohol rehab in Bridgeport, Connecticut, called Pivot Ministries, and we save some lives there. And the thing that's interesting about it is my motto, as of the past couple of years, is to try to be a lot less heroic in the things that you want to achieve, right? And when I first took over as board president of the ministry of Pivot Ministries, I was asked to do it, and I was happy to play a role in it. It started off with just doing a food bank run and things like that, and then I thought to myself, it's 50 guys a year, keeping them off drugs and alcohol, and I don't know if I'm going to donate time to charity. I want it to be something somewhat heroic. And then as I began to get involved and I began to look at it, I realized what an extraordinarily hard and heavy lift that is.
Yeah.
We run the ministry on a small budget, and we get people clean and restore them usefully whole back to their families. And that is an amazing thing. Wow. So I don't think service will ever stop or not be part of what my life is. I just think I'm taking the experiences that I used. I will miss the idea that I might get on a plane and go do my part again. Truly.
Yeah.
Like, it was nice to have that. Like, that was a coping mechanism for me post 9/11. It was a coping mechanism in all the chaos. It was a galvanizing force between me and the best men that I've ever, known and met and continue friendships with. But it's time for the next group of people. I mean, well, probably at this point, it's time for the group after that to take the torch and to continue that kinetic fight that they're capable of doing. And it's time for the rest of us to take the lessons they've learned and, get involved in your communities.
Yeah.
Is my thing.
Is there any certain like organizations that you've had experience or hands-on with that you recommend for veterans?
Yes. Oh my God. Children of Fallen Patriots. Okay. It's an organization started by David and Cynthia Kim. They're kind of neighbors. They live in my town. He's a West Point grad. And I hope I do the story justice, but essentially someone he cared deeply for was killed during Panama, who had a young child in the months.
Oh, wow.
I think it was months old. And they set up a fund to ensure that child had their college paid for. Since that, they've grown it into this extraordinary organization that funds college for any child whose parent was killed in combat.
That's
period.
really cool.
It's really cool. And it's like, part of me can't stand it because it's like, why isn't the government just stepping up and writing a check instead of sending $80 billion in aid to wherever the hell they feel like it? That drives me insane. Shave off a couple billion for the children of dead veterans. Like, can you please? And I'm not trying to be political. It's every administration. Get your act together and get it done. But in the meantime, heroes like David and Cynthia and the team at Children of Fallen Patriots step up and do this incredible work. They have raised millions of dollars. They have sent tons of children to college, and they continue the effort, on a daily basis, doing this incredibly heroic thing. And I am really proud to be even sort of peripherally associated with it. I give what I can to them. And it's such a pleasure to see that there's that much good in the world.
That's what I love hearing about, are like organizations like that. I mean, I think Dan and I have done research, and some people will look at them after, and then the numbers may be skewed, but I think it was an upwards of like 60,000 organizations are out there.
Organizations that
at least benefit veterans. And there's still a major issue, but you find those ones that are far in between, like those that are helping the children, and it's, I don't know, that's pretty incredible to hear that.
The thing that's interesting about them too is, I've landed where I wanted to in my life somehow. I don't know how, but I'm where, and I wouldn't change a thing on that. All right. But if we go back to the reason why I left college, my father died from environmental injuries sustained in Vietnam. Now, I landed where I want to. I have what I need. I'm not asking for a thing beyond what I have, right? But if we consider that you take me, I'm not that unique. And there are a lot of children from the Vietnam era. There are a lot of children that will be affected as we go forward. And the brilliance of Children of Fallen Patriots and the people that work there is they're not looking to tomorrow. They're not writing a check for the fall semester. They are looking to sustain this thing, and they're looking to cover the extraordinary shortfall that's coming down the pipe. And it's thoughtful. And if you look up the percentage of money that gets donated that goes to doing what you think it's for, the percentages are the best I've ever seen. It's not like some of these ones, and we know who the offenders are, where we're talking like 45, 50%. We're talking like 99 or 98. I don't want to misquote, but I encourage everybody to look it up for themselves if they're looking for a charity to get involved in, because the numbers are extraordinary.
That's just crazy to think about too, because I would imagine as a young child that's had to deal with those horrible consequences, and then all of a sudden your education is paid for through an organization that is somewhat tied in the same realm as your family member that passed away. It's almost a motivating factor to push through school, do the best you can, and go out there and really succeed in the real life, because it's almost like, it's kind of like this weight is on you. So I almost imagine that it would encourage these kids to get out there and kind of just do the best they can.
And man, do they. We see their success stories. I mean, we're talking like the opposite of an 18-year-old Steve Forti. These young men and women are getting it done and
Hey, me
knocking
too.
it out of the park.
I slacked off way too much. There's sometimes I'm like, man,
Oh,
not that I wish that happened to my family to motivate me, but something else maybe would have motivated me a little more.
right. And then what happens is you get old enough, and I'm almost there, where you stop caring about what those little fractions of times were, and you realize what brought you to where you are today.
Mm-hmm.
And you start being grateful for even the terrible decisions because it brings you to this place that you're supposed to be at this given time.
Well, it's crazy. And I think a lot of people can relate, but I think in the mindset of an entrepreneur, most people that find themselves as being flunkies or barely getting by through high school or college and then have turned around and opened successful businesses, you hear about that a lot. You hear of people that have been through a lot of trepidations in life that turn around and just have an amazing story to tell.
Well, I think a lot of people have that drive that they want to do something. They just can't find it yet. And it's like, it takes a while for it to click. And what's interesting is going back to your story about the high school jock or whoever, was at the top of his class. And then you saw him and you're like, oh, wow, that was literally peak for him.
What the fuck happened?
That happens, but it's, I think everybody has the capability and the ability to find that spark to drive them to success. And it's just a matter of finding it. And you're right. There's too many examples out there of where school maybe wasn't the right thing or it wasn't the right time for school. And then they figure it out later in life.
Well, there's a million examples of that. And then, you have these things like education's important across the board, right? I mean, without a doubt, it's not arguable. But if we look at these things, right, we have an entire country that needs to get put back together, and that's going to be put back together with people that work in steel and concrete. You're not going to 3D print your 140-story building and wherever it's going to be built. You're not going to 3D print the refrigeration units or the rail lines or anything that's going to be required to keep this country built and growing and running. And a deteriorating infrastructure is a national security emergency, and we're there. Right. So when we talk about education, we need to be careful with what, and I'm not saying us, but I'm saying people need to be careful with education, because yes, there are liberal arts education. I think it's important to study the greats. I think it's important to understand the history and Western Civ. And I think all of that is important as a component, but we need to have a good eye on what are the practical applications that we could start giving people, and whether they're children of veterans or veterans themselves, when they make this transition, right? Are we better off versus a 4-year GI Bill commitment paying, for, a philosophy of Western art? Or should we be equipping them with a truck, welding rig, skill, licensure, and insurance to start their own business, to start putting this nation back together? And I think Children of Fallen Patriots and other organizations like Micro, Dirty Jobs, like these are people that have an eye on that. And especially in the military setting, right? I mean, I basically, when I went back to college, I literally just put my head down. I took 5-6 classes per semester. I knocked it out. I had nothing in common with the students ahead of me, around me. I was paying for it out of pocket. I don't have time for your hangover. I'm trying to learn here, and I really don't have time for whatever drama you got going on. I just want to get my license, my thing that I can earn with, and move forward. And I think that's what we need to be smart about as we look at what we're going to do for our veterans going forward. How are we going to give them means?
And I have, not to steer it too much in a different direction, but I think it's interesting when you first told us this, but you started up a fitness competition app named Fit Fight.
I did. I'm wearing a t-shirt accidentally right now.
Are you?
Ah, perfect.
So I thought it was so interesting that you mentioned that, because I personally don't know too many people that are in like the app development kind of industry. Is that still an interest to you in the future, is like maybe developing more apps?
Without a doubt. I mean, right now, the Hospital for Special Surgery has my full attention, and the people of HSS deserve it, right? It was an amazing learning experience. I was grateful to be in a financial position where I could screw up in a bunch of different directions. It wasn't just a matter of like putting pen to paper, and I did put pen to paper and sketched out and built an app that did something that's never been done before. And we got it in about 7,500 users' hands in over 140 countries. And it was a financial loss, but it was an incredible win from a creation standpoint and a learning standpoint. And it wasn't a huge financial loss, but when you had that moment where we did a jump rope competition and we used one of the prizes we were giving away was a veteran startup called Cross Ropes.
Mm-hmm.
Guy named Dave Hunt, I believe his name was. And he had a relation with one of the guys that worked and volunteered for Fit Bike, because none of us ever got paid. And we had this situation where it was, like, I forget what it was. I think it was double unders, max double unders in 2 minutes or something. We had a kid from Jordan going against a kid from Israel, going against a kid from Argentina, going against a kid from Ireland, going against a kid from Honduras. And this happened in a 24-hour time frame. And then we got blown away because all of a sudden we get a video in from Syria. That was the idea. How do we unite people through competition? How do we teach people that competition is important? And how do we teach people that you should show up and fail to take first place, but continue to show up and find holes in your games and continue to work? So app development is definitely not in my future, but finding ways to inspire actions that I think are important for humanity are definitely in my future.
That's a cool thing to hear about, because I think that, I don't know, you see too many of these app development or workout programs, especially like a lot of like the elite kind of YouTuber people are starting up, and a lot of them are like scams. Like a lot of them are like, oh, pay for this startup, pay for this. You'll be in the best shape of your life. You'll gain 30 pounds of muscle in like 4 weeks. And you're like, no fucking way. So it's cool to hear about like just concepts like that you guys started up.
Well, I like that idea too, because it's such an important thing that I want to circle back to is that connection between people around the world and centralized around competition. Like there is no greater thing to unite people for one common goal than to put a podium or a trophy or to put whatever. I mean, the Olympics are going on right now, and like during COVID, and the world literally stopped, and everybody thought the Olympics was still going to happen last summer up until the 23rd hour, right before, and then they pulled the plug. But still, the world was able to figure out a way to come together now this summer, and it's just so interesting about that idea of getting people on an app, being able to compete with each other around the world. It's just a really cool idea.
Yeah.
Thank you. We had took great pride in it. And, one of the things that was really interesting is, these people were competing for like a t-shirt, right? Like they weren't competing for much. And they were essentially, we're sending a $20 t-shirt, and it's costing $150 to ship it to like,
I was going to say with shipping, that adds up.
Right. And then we're getting hit with so it's a $20 t-shirt that gets shipped to Morocco. And then we're getting an email that the government of Morocco is taxing them, $8 on the $20 value t-shirt that we sent to them. And these people are like, this one young man, literally like there were no screens on his windows. These people were living in poverty. And we had this opportunity here, this thing where we're like, he's working out. He would show up. I can show you guys the videos another time. He would just show up and just compete over and over and over again, whether it was push-ups or sit-ups or whatever. He just got it done. And that was the force behind Fit Fight. That was the idea and the concept behind it.
That's cool.
It was amazing. And I'll never forget when I was able to run the whole company off my app at one point. And I remember being in bed and like getting incredibly emotional when I saw like the Arabic writing, and I saw where these people were competing from and submitting their videos and everything. It makes me reflect on the fact that our wounds as a world are self-inflicted.
Yeah.
And I don't know that you could be a veteran and not recognize that. Now, they're self-inflicted in terms of humanity. I mean, our towers were attacked on 9/11, and there's no way around that fact. Like that's what went down, and it was wrong and unjust, and there was retribution. It should have been. But the precursors to all of those events, and I'm not saying the precursor to 9/11, but the environment, whether it's World War I, World War II, whatever the thing is, these are all choices made by human beings that have caused the sequelae that led us down this road. And I will never get used to this idea that this is as good as we can do.
Well, it's such an important thing. Like World War II is a perfect example. You had one guy, one man's voice that was able to inspire people to commit evil against
An
others.
army. Yeah.
And was able to get a country to commit genocide against a people. And it's just one person's voice. But I would love to think that it's possible to reverse that, that it's possible to unite people again. And I think it is, it's those powerful people. And I don't know if we have one in our day and age right now, but it's like the Nelson Mandelas, it's the MLKs, it's those types of people that are going to unite people to really drive towards a common cause.
Yeah.
But things like this are a perfect way to really put people on a platform where they see that they have a lot of commonalities, that there's more in common with each other than there are differences.
I said that exact thing about more in common than differences when I was speaking about a year ago, when I was asked what was the most shocking thing about combat. And the thing is, I mean, the commonalities, right? Like even in the case of Afghanistan, without getting into an ideological argument, both sides firmly believe that the actions that they are committing are necessary and just.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not getting into whether one is or whether one isn't. It's a time for another discussion, and my opinions are probably what you would think they are. But the reality is both of those. And if you look at throughout the world, we're living in this time, and it doesn't seem that we ever learn a damn lesson.
No.
I mean, look what's going on with China right now, with the Uyghurs. Like, how is this happening right now? And how is there no intervention? How is there no, world focus on that versus the other things that are going on in the world right now? It makes me sad, but I remain hopeful.
Yeah, I do too. I think that we're I think this has always been around, but I just think that we're so stubborn and set in our ways. And then there's also, on the contrary, a lot of people that do want to fight for those issues, that want to bring us together. They almost give up at the first sign of conflict. Like there's not the kind of people, like Dan said, like MLK, they'll sit there year after year after year and put up with all that shit and be like, I'm not changing my direction. This is what I believe in. I'm going to keep going and keep bringing people onto this.
The thing that's so striking about MLK too is that aspect of civil disobedience that he never deviated from. The strength that it takes to not escalate is far greater than its strength.
Yeah.
The strength it takes to resort to kinetic activity.
Yeah.
Right. So wherever you fall out on some of the current civil disobedience, protests, whatever that's going on in the world is irrelevant. We know that the true discipline in this comes through discussion. The productivity comes from discussion. It's like when we talk about, children of fallen patriots. Well, Children of Fallen Patriots is bending over backwards to raise money for children of deceased combat veterans. The federal government could pen stroke this solution, right? But the fight, I had a better point than this, but the fight that currently is being fought in this kinetic space, which never seems to gain any traction.
Yeah.
When some of the change that is necessary and needed in the world could only be done over time and over discussion and over appropriate education, not extreme one way or the other as to the justification of any of it.
Yeah.
Think of the discipline it took for somebody like Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
Or Gandhi. Like, think of the discipline it took to not bring it to that kinetic space. Now, I'm not saying you turn another cheek when people crash planes into your towers. Far from it. And I when it comes to family, when it comes to my country, there's no, I don't believe in throwing the first punch, but I believe in throwing every punch afterwards.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it's difficult to fight for something too when it's not on your doorstep. And like 9/11 was on everybody's doorstep. Yeah. Much closer to some than others, obviously, but the what happened on 9/11 was a blow to the country. So again, it's easy to unite behind something like that, but when, to your point, talking about the Uyghurs in China, like that's so far away from us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's something that just doesn't register in a lot of people's minds because it doesn't affect them. Like, why would they care about it if it doesn't affect them?
And I think the fight right now, and listen, I'm guilty of it. It's an iPhone. I'm guilty of it, right? The right thing is to throw it in the trash, find another way.
Yeah.
We know that that's the right thing to do, but I'm guilty of it just like everybody else is. Like there's a certain in between or justification when it comes to apathy, right? Like how okay am I, or how mad am I really? Like I'd be more likely to get on a plane and go fight for those people than I am to throw out my iPhone. I don't know what the hell that is, but it's probably true. Right?
It's kind of like that crazy, like, I don't know if you watched that Social Dilemma documentary.
I didn't. No.
You got to watch it.
Oh yeah.
Because now you're going to want to throw away your iPhone.
Yeah.
I kind of do already.
Well, it's all geared around like telling you how we are geared as a society thanks to the social construct of social media, and how everything's geared to influence you and keep you connected to your phone with the notifications, the pop-ups, the constant reminders of you need to pick up your phone and look at it. And a very interesting thing, I was just I was listening to an audiobook called Fuck Your Feelings. You guys should listen to it or read it if you haven't. It's a great book. But they were talking about how the input daily to our brains is the equivalent of it was something like 1,000 books or 1,000 articles that you could read, because you're just scrolling through it and it's constant media, constant things that's inputs to your brain that typically wasn't there. Typically all you had, even 30 years ago was a magazine or an article or a newspaper or maybe something on the TV, but it wasn't scrolling through thousands of articles and thousands of comments and thousands of different inputs that are going on at once.
Yeah, you'll have to check it out. We're obviously late to it because it's been a documentary that's been out there for a little while now. But
I know when it came out, and I know the premise of it. It's just I'm kind of, truthfully, I steer myself away from most tech when I can. I'm so work focused with tech that like I don't binge watch anything. I don't do anything anymore. My time is spent, working out, sleeping, and trying not to age. So
that's
which is great.
I think you're on the better side of it. Yeah. It's mostly designed for, kind of a lot of the millennials and people out there nowadays that are using every social media platform, distracting their everyday lives, and how it's catered to your specific interests as opposed to the other, and how that can be political.
Giving away their privacy.
Yeah.
I mean, giving it away wholesale. Like it's extraordinary to me. And we've all become inoculated to that.
Yeah.
Right. Like we're all comfortable. If you had told us 10 years ago that we had to do this and that this would be tracked or whatever, we'd have been like, are you insane? Yeah. And now we become like, well, they probably know it anyway, or they're going to find out anyway. So it's
Steve,
challenging.
you could paint your toenails red, take photos of your feet, and make money off that.
Oh yeah. Post a video of it, and you could you just open up a new business opportunity for him.
There we go.
We'll start an OnlyFans for Steve.
Yeah, it's an interesting time.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about your involvement in the hospital for special surgery, especially how you got there, because I know it was a very interesting story of how you got into your position you are in now, because you told it to us in person. So I was hoping you kind of recap and tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm as proud to work there as I've ever worked anywhere. And there's a lot of reasons behind that, which we're going to. Essentially, March timeframe of 2020, we saw what was happening in early March, and I was kind of had my eye on it. Still got a lot of guys overseas that work in different capacities in the intel world, so it's kind of giving a little bit of a heads up, as I'm sure you were, where it's like, this is legit and it's coming.
Yeah.
So I began dusting off the nursing resume, because you got to get into the fight. The power, if everybody just got into the fight in one way or another, would be extraordinary. But you got to get in the fight. And I think the saying as well as I do. If not now, then when? If not me, then who? Like it means something to me, and I try to live my life by that. And I know there's a ton of men and women who are no longer with us that would kill for the opportunity, do anything for the opportunity to be able to get in a fight once again. So I don't take that lightly. So what had happened was I was literally in the process of dusting off the resume. I'd been out of nursing for a bit. They were talking about changing the re-licensure. I saw my nursing license, but I wasn't current. and I was looking at, I didn't have a New York license, and New York was going to be the epicenter of this thing, as we all knew. So I was looking like, how easily can I transfer a license? They were talking about lowering the requirements and the threshold and expediting it. So I was going through all that process, and a incredibly dear friend of mine, who is one of the kindest and most emotionally dialed in person that I've ever known, is a huge proponent of the military, had called me up, and without impersonating his voice, which I actually do pretty well, he called me up and said, essentially, what do you have going on? Because I think I may have something that's right up your alley. And he put me in touch with two people at the hospital for special surgery. His name is John Clark. He's the chief marketing communications officer at HSS. You won't find a finer human being. And he had put me in touch with Dr. Brian Kelly initially, and then Lou Shapiro, who's the CEO. Brian Kelly is the surgeon chief. And they began to tell me, and I'm going to truncate the story and I'll get it long because the time period is a bit of a blur, but essentially, they were transforming this orthopedic surgical hospital, the number one orthopedic surgical hospital in the world, not even up for discussion, with this extraordinary amount of very specific talent for, getting people back to doing things they love faster than anyone else in the world and better than anyone else in the world. It's what they do. And whether you're a professional athlete or an aging athlete or a mom or a dad, when you got something that's busted or broken or torn, it's where you want to go. They just do it better. And heroically, they decided about mid-March that they would stop all their elective procedures. Now, understand, it's an orthopedic surgical hospital. They make money by doing surgical procedures. That's it. So very heroically, they said, we're stopping all the stuff that we do, and we are pivoting, and we are going to build an institution that will help decant the impending overflow of COVID at our fellow hospitals, where our brothers and sisters in medicine are going to be fighting this fight that's coming.
Oh, wow.
And they did exactly that. They transformed this hospital. They trained the staff. We had anesthesiologists, they know heart and lungs, and they were moving in the direction of treating COVID patients. They were working at other area hospitals, gaining that insight as this hospital was transformed. Nurses who took care of orthopedics and orthopedic people as orthopedic patients as a specialty were now learning COVID and critical care and drug titrations and drips. I'm not doing it justice to say that it was this extraordinary event that was happening. And
how fast did that happen?
I would have to get that for you.
Okay.
Fast as hell. It was
like
in the process. Months. It was already in the process when I was hired, and we had a couple conversations. My first day in, my first day when I drove in was April 2nd. And soon after we began receiving patients. I would say that but they continued to build. So they built an area that patients were then transferred to. Jen O'Neill, the chief nursing officer, was extraordinary in the way that she trained her staff and brought individuals. It began a triaging with a doctor. There's many doctors involved, and I want to apologize if people ever hear this podcast, and I'm not leaving anybody out. But Dr. David Naiman, who's like the number one hip guys in the world, if not the, and he was triaging patients that were brought up that were appropriate for care at HSS. We had Laura Robbins, who was, she's she's been in HSS for a very long time, and she is a trained social worker, and she was looking out for the mental health aspect of the employees. So they brought me in with a very loose plan for what my role was going to be, and the title was Chief of Staff Crisis Management. Part of that was being driven by we didn't know the degree of coordination that I would be possibly doing. We did know that there probably should be a title associated with it, but more importantly, we knew that there had to be flexibility in whatever it was that Steve Forti was going to be doing. So they hired me for a 90-day contract to come in and figure out what we were going to do. And the thing that's interesting about it is it was a leadership team, Lou Shapiro at the helm, Brian Kelly, the surgeon in chief, who literally, I was sort of part of this solution to throw every bit of whatever they could at this impending crisis or problem. I don't know if I like the word crisis, but they literally just pulled out all the stops. They did whatever they could to safeguard for their people. And then I drove in on April 2nd. I wanted to be part of this team. When I saw who they were, it was like, finally, you know what I mean? Like, you felt that same pull, that same calling that got you on a plane to Afghanistan. And I see these people, and I wanted to be part of that team. Okay. And let me be perfectly clear. They didn't need Steve Forti. They would have been fine without Steve Forti. All right. I think I helped a few people along the way. But this was a place, like, if it was really, really lacking in certain ways, it would have been easy to look really effective. But, they are the number one at what they do because they are an incredible group of high performers. There's an incredible amount of humility in the entire organization, where orthopedic surgeons were acting literally as interns, taking orders to admit COVID patients. People were doing what they could. And it was a heroic display from a lot of people. Now, I was grateful for the opportunity, and what we discovered was there was this gap, right? Because there's a lot of corners in a hospital, and there's a lot of things that were increasing this concept. I want to talk about the allostatic load on the individuals that were part of this institution. So my first efforts were focused, and when I say please know that there's this, implicit OUR in all caps and bolded. But, our initial fear was like, well, we're going to have nurses treating COVID positive patients. They're under incredible stress. Many of them were orthopedic nurses who continue to just step up and do this job that's required, not the job that they wanted, right? And they were going to be stressed and uncomfortable. And this is going back to a time where it's like, how's this thing spread? PPE requirements were changing every day. What is the actual lethality of this virus? Like, all these different things that were going on. And these people were walking into the unknown. And there was a place for someone, and it happened to be me, but someone with a background similar to mine. Now, they were able to, I think I had some street credibility as an ICU nurse and an emergency room nurse, right? So I think I had a bit of he's part of us, not fully part of us, but he's part of us in the medical world, even though he's not working in that capacity here. He's kind of part of us. He knows the shoes to some degree, right? And then I also had this component where it's like, he's a special operations guy. He's been in combat, and he's different than us, but I think he might know something that could help us through whatever maybe he did in those more trying times would be helpful to us. And what we found, that very inefficiently, but I hope effectively, I literally patrolled the hospital nonstop. Okay. And it was very simply a matter of fact of saying, like, how are you doing? Right? What do you need? And there was always this, operational need because things were changing. And I was a conduit to just bring that information back. They had that, like, it was so many times I would go back and I'd be like, hey, they need this. And, Jen O'Neill would be like, yeah, no, that's happening tomorrow at 12:01 like, it was pretty amazing. But, sometimes it was another, set of eyes on a problem where I could say, like, hey, this is what they're identifying as a need. So there was that piece of it. And then the other part of it was like, how are you doing? And, at 1 o'clock in the morning, how are you doing sometimes goes a long way. Yeah. And then the other part of it is, I don't know how, but I do know it's going to be okay. I do know that we're going to get through this. Right. And, even going as far to say, to be like, we always do, like, there's going to be a strategy to get through this. And if you feel stressed, well, you should. We're in the middle of a damn pandemic at the epicenter of it. Like, you're not a baby. This is real. So that was the first thing. And that was, among the healthcare professionals, the first line providers, right? And then what struck me the most, and I was actually embarrassed about, is, a few weeks in, I started discovering all these other nooks and crannies to the hospital, and realized that there were people that were not doctors and nurses and nurse anesthetists and physician assistants that were involved in patient care. There was environmental people that were rightfully scared, that were cleaning the rooms. There were all of these people, like dietary, like so many
Yeah.
people that played a role. There was security. We transformed our front door. Basically, all of a sudden we had a bit of an emergency room, and our security, who normally is in this fairly controlled non-clinical setting, now was in a very uncontrolled clinical setting, right? So these roles changed. And then there was these groups like central sterile processing. They clean all the stuff that we use. And even though we stop at our elective surgical procedures, we still had surgical procedures going on for traumas and things that couldn't wait, right? So these people now were coming in from different areas from all through New York. They were previously riding the subways and buses that were either no longer available, no longer efficient, no longer safe, right? Scary in themselves in terms of COVID. We had people double masking, taking subway rides. Like, it was incredibly stressful. And we had all these people coming. And in the meantime, they've got ailing parents. Some of them had parents that were intubated in the ICU with COVID. So there's all these things going on, all this load. And sometimes it was just a matter of identifying who those people were, keeping an eye on them, connecting them to critical mental health resources, connecting them to a peer. We had a peer support program. So shaking the hands with, like, hey, this is your big brother or sister in this trial right now that we're going through, and we got your back. And then checking in on the next day and saying, how are you doing? And I'm better than I was. How's your mom doing? She's getting better. We had good news today. And it was just that humanity and just that extra set of eyes on the emotional well-being of the people at HSS.
I'm wondering, because I know a lot of people saw it on the news play out, but especially if you weren't in the Northeast, you weren't in the New York area, you weren't in the epicenter, but somebody who was directly, quote, on the front lines dealing with it, how significant or how much of an impact was it to everybody in that area, especially when COVID was at its height, which I think New York City or the New York area was losing like up to 3,000 people a day or something like that. It was a ridiculous.
I can't remember the numbers, but the number of cases were certainly up there, and it was extraordinary. Like the loss of life was extraordinary. Now, one point of clarification, having seen what I've seen, I wasn't on the front lines, not by a long shot. I was intermittently connected to people who were living in the rooms, people that were staying in the rooms because they weren't coming on and off with the PPE, and it was just easier to stay in the room and chart than it was. Like, those are the people that the world thinks of and should. It was not me. It wasn't. We have an anesthesiologist at HSS, and he was such an incredible example of what heroic looks like, because he was across the street at New York Presbyterian before we started taking patients, or I think even as we were, just helping out, distribute the load, and just was basically living there. We had residents who were deployed all over the city as part of their normal orthopedic residency that were now working in the EDs, in the emergency rooms, as first year or second year. Those are the people that you're referencing, and just very clearly that wasn't me. I had increased risk than if I was staying inside my house, but nothing I did was extraordinary in that realm. I did have opportunities, a few of them, where I was going to different hospitals in the New York area, and from what I saw at HSS and from what I saw at these hospitals, the sheer scope of it was unlike anything I've ever seen. It was massive amounts of logistical support and manpower being leveraged against a problem that was growing exponentially. And it was you knew it was going to ebb, and we have brilliant people that work in that space, like predictive modeling, analytics, et cetera, that were saying, yeah, we agree with the numbers, or it's going to be this mark, and they were good. So you always had this, they're really good. You always had this sort of reality picture of, if we just get to this point, then things are going to start. And we knew it wasn't going to be like, okay, we're over the hump, boom, PPE off, let's get back to normal. We knew it wasn't going to be that, but we did know there was an inflection point, right? But it was enormous. I don't know how to describe it. And again, my view was so different. Like at area hospitals, there were ICU nurses that did this for like months and months and months on end without a break. People working multiple shifts, people getting sick, getting COVID, taking time off, then getting healthy, coming back and performing that task again. It was a pretty extraordinary time. And I hope that we spend considerable effort as a nation to look at all those critical players, to see who they were, because they were the medical staff, and no one disputes that, right?
Yeah.
But there was pockets of heroes that were getting the job done every single day and playing a role that are doing a thing. You know, I always say that your relative emotional exposure for post-traumatic stress is directly tied to how close you are to your technical or tactical proficiency. Right. So if you're in your zone and you're in your flow state, like, you're good. You really are. You're good. Right. But then it's like, well, hey, we're going to change your job this much. And then we're going to change it this. And we're going to give you a new piece of equipment and a new radio and a new weapon system and a new this. And now you're not as familiar with this, or now you're on a different team that you haven't gelled with. And that's when that heightened state, you know, starts to spike. That's when that static load begins bearing down on an individual that starts having metabolic implications to their well-being. And I think that's a lot of what you're going to see here in the country for the mental health crisis. That is, without a doubt, it's not whether or not a mental health crisis is coming to the United States. We are at the beginning of it, and it is going to be profound.
I'm kind of curious. Like, I think I was talking to like a couple of other nurses, and I know it's kind of no one really knows, but they were basically talking about how the economy, you know, was affected by it, and they're basically saying that they don't think things will actually go back to normal until like 2024. They said that businesses will probably recover for the most part by like 2022, but the social aspects of being around each other, and not that like weird, like you're standing next to someone and you start to see them kind of inch away, like for just things to like go away and go back to normal. They were thinking like, I think last year it was like 4 years.
I don't know that I would disagree with that. We've got a group of children that don't remember what it's like to not wear a mask in a setting, you know. I don't know that I would disagree with that. Like, you know, you can say, hey, we're all open for business, but I still see people wearing masks walking the streets in New York. And now I'm fully vaccinated, plus I'm certain I had it. And quite frankly, I'm done with masks. Truly. Like if I'm in a clinical setting at the hospital, I'm compelled to wear it, but I'm done. Like emotionally, I'm done. You know, and I think there's a lot of people there. I think there are a lot of people that will never unmask. And I think that this is one of those things, because if you're in healthcare, we go back to my assumption, right? The closer you are to your technical, tactical proficiency. Okay. People say like, well, they've never been here before. Let's talk like critical care nurses, nurse anesthetists, doctors, physicians assistant. They're not unfamiliar with PPE. They're not unfamiliar with working in these conditions. Now, the longevity and the lethality of this virus was pretty scary, right? Being overwhelmed was a scary proposition. But I think, and I'm not diminishing what these people went through by any stretch of the imagination, but I think you will see that correlation for people who were compelled to all of a sudden start wearing PPE, and the amount of residual anxiety and stress that they have as a result of it. So, you know, think about like being a grocery worker. Like these people had to go to work, had to be, checkout, right? So they're working checkout, they're wearing a mask. People are coming in, they're being exposed to 12, 13, 14, 1,500 people per day for the lowest bracket of income and wage. No emotional support. The Blue Angels are not flying over the Whole Foods for them, right?
Yeah.
And here they are, and even some of them are like, I'm a single mom or dad. Like, I don't have the choice. We need insurance. I have to go to work. Like, I'm not being a hero. I have to do this, and I don't have an option, and I'm not being given the option. People need food to eat. So I think that's what's coming down the pipe for us as a nation? How do we start safeguarding those unsung heroes' well-being? And I know the medical profession is going to have it as well, but I am equally concerned about the people in everyday life that were so profoundly affected by this.
It goes back to what we were about to talk about at the very beginning when we were talking about the comparison of 9/11 and the comparison to COVID, and how there was such a unity behind 9/11, but I think it was because it was such an instantaneous thing and it was a clearly visible enemy, whereas COVID there were so many things going on at once. People didn't really know who the enemy was. People didn't really know if this was even a real virus. Like, there's still people questioning whether or not it is, and which is insane to me. But one thing that I'm hoping does not come from this is I feel like when 9/11 happened, there was an immediate surge of support for first responders, for fire and police officers and everything. But then that support kind of slowly trickled away. And now you're seeing a lot of the people who were there having respiratory diseases, to having a lot of issues of all the toxins that they inhaled and things like that. I'm hoping that doesn't happen to the people who are affected, who were truly on the front line and were the nurses that were thrown into the middle of it, that had to work those long hours, that probably are going to feel the effects of PTSD long after the COVID is done.
Yeah.
And just, I'm wondering if there's a solution or a lesson to be learned from everything that we've gone through as a nation in the past, that hopefully we can have a message of, this is how we need to perform moving forward.
I am continually impressed by people's resilience, right? And at the same time, I am continually surprised by the ability for people to forget the emotional magnitude of certain moments. And you brought up the time about 9/11, right? Overnight, galvanized people, USA,
Yep.
USA, USA, right? And I remember, some time had passed, and I truly don't remember how much time had passed, but I do remember there was an inflection point. I was up in Newport, Rhode Island, where my unit was stationed out of, and I was, pulling out of a gas station. And in fairness, I pulled out a little bit too slowly, like it was a bad driving judgment, right? And somebody, waves around me, gets in front of me, whatever, and they start losing their mind, giving me the finger. And I was like, okay, we're back to normal now. Like,
yeah,
somebody's losing their shit over, and it wasn't even an awful judgment call. It was a reasonably bad driving decision on my part, So I hope that we begin the process now of levying the assets that are necessary to start safeguarding these individuals at the 12-month, 18, 24-month mark and the 10-year mark from now. Like we have this reactive positioning with most crises, right? Like a crisis happens and we start living resources and we pull out all the stops for it. Well, it's better than not doing that, right? However, what are we going to do to safeguard people going forward? And I'll bring up one example right now. It's a pet peeve of mine. We know that insulin receptivity is a bad thing, or insulin insensitivity somewhat correlates with COVID mortality. We know obesity certainly does. We know vitamin D deficiency certainly does. We are not having a conversation about anybody losing weight.
Yeah.
How are we not having a conversation? And now we're coming up on 18 months. If every single person just lost a pound per month, think of how much that would safeguard, right? But when our time is spent arguing over the efficacy of certain vaccines or not, or whether certain people should get vaccines and certain people shouldn't, and we've politicized just about everything, and we're still not down to the core fact of the matter is that with the exception of the vaccine, I think, I'm not a medical person when I'm saying this, and I'm not representing HSS when I'm saying this, But from a medical perspective, I think the most important thing that we could do is vaccinate people, right? But the second most important thing we could do was start addressing the public health crisis here in the nation.
Mm-hmm.
It is very rare, if ever, that the healthiest and strongest among us are more susceptible to a pandemic. The pandemic that took place in 1917 actually did attack young people, but that's because their immunity, they didn't have the immunity from 1865 when the pandemic struck then. So
Yeah.
I can't believe we're here and no one is talking about fitness. No one is talking
Mm-hmm.
about vitamin D. Nobody's saying get out in the sun. Nobody's saying get out. There's been a lot of podcasts with a lot of smart people that have talked about and discussed these things. Like, we know vitamin D is important. Staying inside actually decreases vitamin D. Get outside
absolutely.
seems to be a natural solution, but we're not having those conversations. We're talking about whether or not kids should be masked during lacrosse and football practice. You think we need a mask outside?
Yeah.
Yep.
It's kind of like those, it's like that people always laugh at that would wear them inside their car and they're the only ones inside the car.
Unless you're an Uber driver and it's just easier to keep it on.
Yeah.
Right? There's got to be something to this, that's negative. And that's sort of my frustration. So, rather than, so there's that piece, to answer your question or to comment on your question. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, I hope people wake up to the fact that you need to be your own 911, right? Like, it's not saying that you can't have 911 and you shouldn't have 911 and you shouldn't have all the support and everything from the military, the government, all those things. But if you live your life and create an attitude or cultivate an attitude that there's no one else coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's you, you're your family's hero, or you are your own hero. And if you started making decisions and preparing for those things in that way, then the government, then the 911 call becomes a nice to have. The medical community, the heroes on the front line, is a nice to have. It's a thank God we have.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a we need it for our survivability.
Yep.
And I think, and I'm making shit up here, but I would say that was how my grandfather felt and how his grandfather felt. Like, I don't think they relied on the government for much of anything.
Mm-hmm.
They certainly didn't rely on the government to handle it. I mean, they signed up and enlisted in massive amounts for World War II.
Yeah.
So be your own 911, I guess, is what I hope we take away from this. But I'm not seeing that, and it's concerning me because I don't know what happens. I mean, we literally, we have unidentified aerial phenomena on radar and video. I mean, everywhere. And only in 2021, 2020, is it not even really acknowledged and discussed. Right?
Well, that's the interesting part is now we're segueing into that. But I remember I was reading an article that said, remember those people that were telling the government that there were aliens back in the day, and they're like, nah, it's weather balloons. And now it's opposite. Now the government's like, okay, Pentagon actually released that there's evidence that F-15 pilots and commercial airliners are seeing them every day off the coast of the Carolinas, almost every day. And now people are like, nah, it's probably weather balloons. I'm like, you guys fucking wanted this like 20 years ago.
Right. Well, because now that it's real, now it might be a little bit like, so let me get this straight. These things can basically move flawlessly in and out of our airspace.
Yeah, bring them down. Control. I want to meet them.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at with it.
I want to say hello to them. Hopefully they'll be friendly.
I have to think, I truly have to believe this fact that, right, like, so whatever it is so clearly a drone. Right? Like, there's just no way there's a manned craft cooped up for however many seconds it takes for them to travel. Drone. But seriously, I think it's going to be an interesting story, but it brings up such an interesting point that when you have this, we didn't think there would be civil unrest throughout most of the nation as of March or April of last year, but we had significant civil unrest. And then we certainly didn't think there would be unidentified aerial phenomena.
Oh, man.
I would not for a second think that within 2 or 3 months, you and I aren't texting each other being like, didn't see this one coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, giant moths. Who knew? Like, so I think we need to get used to the fact that we need to start preparing for what is entirely unexpected and something we've never seen before.
I think
And we should
people
start
are
now.
having that realization, like you said, they're a little nervous now, because now it challenges beliefs. It challenges everything that we've ever known. And then there's that funny joke that, like, they're probably just watching us, realizing that we're slowly killing each other off, and they're like, we're not even going to show ourselves until they're ready to settle their own shit out.
Yeah.
Right. Or they're like, okay, like they're reporting back to higher, and they're like, they got enough nuclear power to just unload on this earth like 900 times over. Like, we don't know if we want to poke this bear. Let's not make any rash decisions that might lead to an intergalactic anything. Like, maybe they're the mature ones.
Oh yeah,
Like,
exactly. They've settled their disputes light years back.
Right.
To your point, you were just talking about, though, is and we talked about this when we were in person, is being prepared for the unknown, but not being fearful of the unknown, and really preparing yourself, your body, your mind, being in the most stable, healthy position you can be to really provide for yourself, your family, your community, whatever it is. And you talked a lot about, the sleep that you're getting, the physical fitness, and you talked about it being outside and things
The
like
sleep
that.
hygiene.
Yeah. Just, how important is really all of that to all of us.
Yeah. So all of these things it's a trade-off, right? I wish I could get 10 hours a night. I don't think I could, even if I had the bandwidth and time to do so, right? Like, but let's say that you could get, like, everything is in this sort of a flux state, right? Like, there's a need, and there's a need and a capability, and sometimes those things match up, and that's great. But we trade, and I don't do this anymore, but I used to, I would trade binge watching 3 episodes of The Walking Dead, right? And thinking to myself, well, I'm pretty well prepared if that ever happens. Not saying I'd be a lot more prepared if I got another 2 or 3 hours of sleep tonight, right? So we constantly trade in this currency of time. We only have time is the constraint for all these things. So there's time that's a constraint for physical fitness, for the health of the food that we put into our bodies, and the sleep. Like, sleep is my pet peeve.
100%.
Right? There's a few things, and they're critical. And we treat aging like an inevitable possibility, but we should be treating it like a disease, and we treat disease like an inevitable possibility. So I think we need to fundamentally shift, and we talk about, like, be your own ... Well, maybe the ... is be your own care provider.
Yeah.
Be the person that gets sleep early, because over time sleep matters. We talk, I'm candid. I'm sober for 6 years now. Right. Never had this catastrophic event that led to my sobriety. I knew it wasn't working for me. I knew it was getting in the way of the pursuit of the things I loved and cared about and enjoyed. So I made a decision to live deliberately and stop drinking. I suspect drinking is probably not good for the prevention of communicable diseases. Yet alcohol sales went through the roof during COVID, right? And we know that it gains weight, and we know that it interferes with sleep. So I think there needs to be an honest discussion about, like, what are we going to start putting a prize on for? What are we going to start emphasizing, right? So are we going to start having the conversations where it's like, alcohol moderation is not a couple of glasses 7 days a week.
Yep.
Right? Like, alcohol moderation has a scale, and I'm not judging anybody that doesn't follow sobriety. I think if you are a person that could incorporate alcohol reasonably into your life and enjoy a celebration, that's great. It's not who I was. Ever will be. And I got a mother that proved it, and I got a grandfather that proved it as well, and probably a long line of, alcohol misusers that preceded them. I think it's important we start having honest discussions with ourselves, right? As a nation, we're morbidly obese.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't sleep enough. We make poor consumption choices, and whether that's in the food that we ate, or whether that is in the alcohol that we consume, or the drugs that we use, we make generally poor choices. We prioritize consumption of alcohol, or misconsumption of a lot of things, over fitness.
Yeah.
over walking. We say like 2021, I'm going to run a marathon. Well, how about you run 4 5Ks, one per quarter, and improve and train your time each one? How far would that get us as a nation, or how far would that get us individually as somebody who is closer towards reasonable physical fitness, instead of training out to run a marathon and then having an overuse injury at week 8 of your training? And then you're going to say, well, I'm going to do it 2 or 3 years from now. These things are critically important. Nutrition is critically important. Hydration is critically important. Sleep is profoundly important. When you look at things, and I don't want to get into statistics, but the tie between insomnia and suicide is extraordinary. If you take insomnia and alcohol, it goes up. If you take insomnia, alcohol, and lethal access to lethal means, it goes up even further.
Wow.
We have 18 to 25 veterans a day committing suicide. That is pandemic. That is an epidemic in itself. There's a mental health crisis, right? But we don't talk about meditation and high five each other as men or women. For it's like, you did yoga 4 times this week. That's fantastic. We didn't say, oh my God, you didn't drink in 8 days. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
What do we high five each other for? Yeah, I got up this morning. I did CrossFit with a hangover. I got my workout in. I slept in my car for an hour. I got my work done, and now I got to go home. We need to change what we reward, and we need to be a little bit more respectful for the one go round we have in this existence.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious on your point as we start to wrap up. Even tying that into that helps everybody with civilians, but how do you really think that can affect veterans? Like, what do you think from your lessons you've learned and seeing how it's affected other veterans? What steps can they be taking to make their transition easier with some of these things?
Listen, I can't. I think there is a time. So I'll answer that on the sobriety piece, right? Because I think that's a critical component to what we're looking at here. And you're talking to somebody whose grandfather hung himself in his basement, who was an alcohol abuser. It is a informed opinion. Might be wrong on a larger scale, but I don't think so. The veteran piece is a complicated one, right? Because we give praise and thanks in fits and spurs. It's a hero's welcome home, and then it's now what, right? And it's we drop the ball on the continuity of care. And they're getting better from the VA perspective, but the VA is a medical piece, right? So when we talk about what should we be doing is, well, it should begin that the day that you get a soldier in your care or in basic training, you start talking about the importance of sleep hygiene. But instead, what do? Well, we put them through 13 weeks of basic training. We give them 4.5 hours of sleep a night. We underfeed them. They're hypocaloric. They're profoundly dehydrated. Many of them are injured in training. And then we send them into a similar environment where we tell them they haven't done anything or no shit yet, and they continue to be treated in a similar fashion. Then they go to advanced training like Ranger School, where you get even more sleep deprivation, you're even more malnourished, and you get further down this continuum of getting broken as a person, right? And along that whole way, right, you go through this ebb and flow of over consumption of alcohol. And it's rewarded. It's high fives. I don't want the guy that can't PT hungover, ha, 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 right? Anybody could shoot straight, with a good night's rest. I want the guy that could do it, or the gal that could do it under ABC conditions, ha, ha, ha. And we don't high five for it's like, what'd you do this weekend? Not much. Got my personal affairs in order. I read, I journaled, because we know that gratitude plays a role in grounding. I did some breath work. I learned a new skill in coping with stress. I met with a group of guys, and whether it's a Bible study, which if it's your thing, it's your thing, or whether it's a group of people that get together for any common purpose. And then you actually start your Monday off fully hydrated, nourished, not hungover, and you go to work, right? So the problem, so there's the transitioning piece, right? And that is down here, that is down the road, okay? But we should be caring for them and preparing them for the transition the minute they meet with the recruiter. And we should own that aspect of it, because as senior leaders, non-commissioned or otherwise, or officers, we own that soul. You're talking about an 18-year-old kid from wherever, varying background, various socioeconomic, varying degrees of preparedness for the enormity of what they're about to undergo for 36 months. And we drop the ball the day we meet them. And we should be teaching them the tools, right? Because when you're going to a mental health provider, and the stigma should not be there for that. And if you need that, that's great. It should be available to them. But when you go to the mental health provider, we've already gotten you behind the power curve, when you should be doing the things leading up to that, where that can be an adjunct assistance. It could be something that could help turn the corner or help strategize a better way of doing things, versus like, I think I'm coming apart and I need to talk to somebody. So that's where it begins. Day one, when we take a soldier into the care, and we owe it to them and we owe it to their families, and we drop the ball on that. I've been out for a bit. Maybe they've gotten better, but I don't know.
Well, the numbers aren't getting better. So, I mean, I think that's telling in itself.
Right.
And it's very unfortunate. And, you know, going back to Bo's point at the very beginning, where we were talking about different service organizations and Children of the Fallen Patriots, is like, there's so many different veteran service organizations out there that you would think we could figure this out. You would think we would have enough money and support behind these programs to figure this out. But obviously there's a systematic issue. And whether it's, to your point, in that day one, walking into basic training or into your unit and not having the right mentor to teach you, you know, how to cope with the stresses of serving in the military, or it's that mentor that's helping you when you're leaving the military and telling you, hey, things are going to be different and this is what you need to think of. But the problem is in that transition piece, 99.9% of the time, there's nobody available who's went through it, because everybody's been serving the entire time.
Right.
And so there's nobody there to teach them, hey, you're going to go through X, Y, and Z. Just realize what this is going to be like, and let me tell you the right and wrong things to do. Instead, they try and bring some outside person who has no credibility, you've never served with, you don't have any sort of connection with them. So why would you listen?
My computer's at 4%. I'll talk to you guys as long as you want, but if we're going to do it, I want to plug in. So let me know if you want to continue this. You guys have me as long as you need me tonight.
No, you're good.
Well, I don't know if you wanted to respond to that, but if you do,
I do. No,
okay.
I do.
So plug it in.
There is, I think I got time for that. It's a new computer, so I think I got some time on the battery. Probably got about 10 minutes left.
You're good.
Man, doesn't it strike a chord with you when you talk about being your own 911, right? So how do we prepare these individuals for that transition versus that outside person that has no credibility? I mean, I went through the VA system. I've actually had some decent results with going through the VA for certain things. I also have my own counselor that I talk to for things that happened in the military and things that happened out of the military. The mental health professional piece is an incredibly complex dance, right? It's kind of like speed dating that costs you a lot of money. Like, it takes a bit to find the right person. You got to retell your own story. You know, you don't know if that's going to be the right fit or the right dance partner. And it's painful and it's easy to give up on. Right. And then, like you said, they bring in outside consultants. You know, I know in the military, right? So the Ranger Regiment is a special organization. I have no affiliation with it, but it's a special organization, as you know. The Marine Corps takes this journey seriously, right? And they care for their people. What we need is this widespread cultural shift to where it's like, your service is going to break you to some degree. Your service is going to break you, whether you deploy to combat or not. You jump out of planes, you're going to leave us fucking broken. You're going to leave us less than what you came to us as. And we owe it to you to equip you, right? But instead, you get this, and I've seen them, the non-commissioned officers and officers alike. You know, I've had friends call me up, say like, hey, my son is in Fort Benning, or my son is here, and this is what happened. And I've been told stories of people just failing in the recognition of the emotional state or the emotional fragility. A reasonable person would be stressed by entering a combat environment. An 18-year-old person who's never left their hometown will be reasonably stressed or profoundly stressed, and rightfully so, when someone starts shooting at you and trying to kill your friends. And we have to stop treating the response to that as a character flaw. It's infuriating. It's absolutely infuriating. Not always. I had the luxury of firing my first shots in a combat environment at age 37, 36. I'd lived a lifetime already. I'd been in emergency rooms. I'd seen terrible things. Right. I've been inoculated to it to some degree. When I worked at Bridgeport Hospital, you see pediatric burns and child abuse and horrific shit. But that does inoculate you to some degree. And when you see those things, you're surrounded by people in a nursing environment that put their arm around you and say, yeah, this is awful. And we get it. And unfortunately, you're not going to see more of it, and you're not going to get used to it. But that sometimes is enough. But we don't necessarily I haven't witnessed that to the same degree as I have in the military. When are we going to start equipping people to be their own response?
Yep, absolutely. Well, Steve, I know, Dan, I can't thank you enough for just finally having you on. I know that all of our lives are busy, and we're trying to juggle everything at once, especially you being a busy man and running such an incredible company and help leading that. And just thank you for being on and sharing your story with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, listen, I'm so grateful for your time, and these conversations are therapeutic for me as well. And I will talk to you both at any time, as much as you would like, on any topic that you want to talk to. You're a pleasure to know, and it's an honor to meet you both. I think what you did in the book is extraordinary and helpful, and it tells a story in a very unique and special way that I think is going to resonate with people that it matters to. So, everyone chooses their line of service, and you guys continue to serve us in the military community, and I'm grateful for it and grateful to know you both.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for those words.
We're very excited for people to open up the book and read more of your story in there too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I look forward to it as well. Thanks you so much, guys.
All right.
Have a great
Thanks,
evening.
Thank you.